Open.
Outspoken.
It's ophthalmology off the grid.
An honest look at controversial topics in the field. I'm Blake Williamson.
I'm Gary Wörtz.
Thank you for listening to Ophthalmology Off the Grid. In this episode, solo host Dr. Gary Wörtz invites Dr. Neda Shamie to share her surgical horror story in which she encountered an expulsive hemorrhage. Hear more about her approach.
Welcome back to Ophthalmology Off the Grid. This is your host, Dr. Gary Wörtz. Today I'm flying solo. My partner in crime, Blake Williamson, was pulled away at the last minute, all for good reasons. But tonight I'm flying solo, but I couldn't be sharing the evening with a better guest. It's my longtime friend, my colleague, my mentor, Dr. Neda Shamie. Neda is practicing at Neda Shamie Vision Institute in LA. And Neda, welcome back to the podcast.
Gary, thank you so much for having me. I love what you've done with this podcast. I was a guest of the podcast, I think, over 4 years ago. One of the first seasons, I think you were doing this. And it's incredible how much you have contributed to our field. I love what you did with it. I love how you pivoted during COVID. I'm proud to know you. I'm inspired by you and how fun to be back on again. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you were too kind. For those of you who don't remember the first time that I came on, she shared her story about her childhood and coming here from Iran and going back and forth a couple times. What's been so interesting for me, as I digress just a bit, this podcast started because I just wanted to learn from people about things I was really interested in. And it started with learning about what's new in ophthalmology, what's new in cataract and refractive surgery. But pretty quickly, I realized that I was actually just more interested in the people. The ophthalmology part of it is fun too. And don't get me wrong, it's very important that we educate each other. But, we are surrounded by amazing people who have overcome very interesting challenges in their life. And I think it would be a shame to lose those stories and that bit of it, and that's where I feel like kind of connecting the humanity to what we do became really important to me, and it still is. So with that being said, for those who have not heard your story in the past or who may not be familiar with you, the one or two people out there who may not know you, just give a little brief intro about your background and maybe just tell us a little bit about your practice, just for context.
Sure, of course. My background, I'm originally from Iran. I came to the States really officially when I was 12, almost 13, after the Iranian Revolution and actually during the Iran-Iraq War. We fled the country. We moved to California. My father is a psychiatrist. Long story short, he decided to really place us in a place where it was not very diverse. So we lived in a place in LA that is not where all the other Iranians lived. And so it really forced my brother and I to immerse ourselves in the culture. And this is important because I really feel that it helped us find our path and be able to thrive. So that's it. So I went to med school at UCSF. I did my residency at UC Irvine and did a fellowship in cornea refractive. I've had a very circuitous path in my career. Academics for the first 15 years. And then this last 5-6 years almost, I joined Robert Maloney in private practice. And it's been a fun ride. I have to say that it's kept me on my toes. And I feel like I keep reinventing myself. Although I don't plan on reinventing myself again, this is my forever practice. And I'm really excited to be where I am in my career.
Yeah. One thing you said, and it will always, I always think of it when I see you, and I think of it sometimes if I'm down. It's just, you say, live life as if it's rigged in your favor and things will usually work out. And so
That's definitely my favorite Rumi quote. Thank you for
Yes.
memorizing it. I love that. I use that a
Yes.
lot. My kids are sick of me saying that
Well,
to them.
I am not sick of it. And I've attributed it to you, but I guess from now on I have to attribute it to Rumi. So, well, okay. So we are going to talk, our season is about horror stories in ophthalmology. So talking about our challenges. Before we get into any specific case that you might want to talk about or that we can commiserate through, just tell me about the difference between academics and private practice. Because when we talked, or you were on the podcast last time, I think you were just at the very beginning of starting private practice and you've been most of your life in academics. So how are you liking private practice? Give us a little pro and con or what you see as the differences.
I mean, I had three major changes in my career. The first type of practice I was in was an academic in a private setting. So I was with Mark Terry in Portland, Oregon, and highly prolific private practice, but in the setting of a big hospital and highly academic. That to me felt like a prolonged fellowship because I had so much to learn. So I won't be able to really comment on what it would be like to be part of that type of practice. But then I went into academics. What I loved about academics was the team spirit, working shoulder to shoulder, side by side with retina specialists, glaucoma specialists, other specialists who are at the top of their game and really focused on moving the needle forward. And then my favorite part of academics was to have fellows and residents and medical students around me and to have opportunity to really be a mentor to the next generation and inspire the next generation. But what I didn't like was the bureaucracy, was the challenge in being able to, on one hand, you're in a setting where you think you're there to move the needle forward, but ophthalmology, as you know, the needle moves really fast. And academics tend, at least the setting I was in, I felt like I was being held back. And the other thing that's important to understand in academics is as ophthalmologists, you're like at the bottom of the totem pole because academic institutions respond to the halo effect of the department. And ophthalmologists, we're in our own silo. And unless you're part of a private eye institute within an academic institute, you really don't have much of a say in the budgets moving, being invested in your department. So like wanting to do laser cataract surgery, wanting to do refractive surgery, all those things, I felt like, gosh, I mean, I'm dragging my feet when all my friends who are in private practice, year after year, they were doing newer things. So I think I would have probably stayed in academics if the politics and the bureaucracy hadn't gotten so bad that I almost felt like I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I left. Never thought I would be in private practice. I was one of those academic snobs for a long time.
Really?
And yeah, I was a pretty academic. I was very, very snobbish about it. Like, I'm not in it for the money, that's thinking that everyone in private practice is in it for the money. But now that I'm one of those private practice people, I realized that no, I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it for the innovation, the excitement, the industry relations, the
autonomy,
the creative ability. I mean, I love that year after year I'm doing different things. And if a new laser comes up and it's proven to be amazing, I can make the decision to just bring it onto my practice. And I love that. I feel like I've lost years. I mean, I've gained years in my career. Whereas in academics, year after year, I wasn't making any ding in moving myself forward in the advances that came. So I don't want to discount, again, every institution is different. I mean, you look at, for example, Julie Schallhorn at UCSF, she's making huge impact. She's in an institution that supports that more forward movement. So it's different in academics where you are and who your chair is, who your leader is, if they are visionaries. And I think the timing that I was where I was not ideal. So
and there's also seasons of life. Some seasons of life you need to be in a place where you're surrounded by those challenges because you find it to be interesting and you're growing. But if you feel like you're not growing anymore, then that's probably a sign that you need to make some sort of change. Because there's probably a lot of people out there right now in that same situation. They're trying to weigh the pros and cons, or is this the right time? And I would just say, it's really not a right or wrong. It's about, fit and season and the amount of risk you want to take, because there's definitely, some risk involved with going in private practice as well. It's not all just, butterflies and rainbows on the private side either.
I tell you though, what I miss the, again, medical students, the residents, the fellows. I miss having mentees.
Yeah.
And I really miss complicated cases. I miss those. Now, especially because I have a daughter who is pre-med and is kind of exploring what field she wants to go in. And she's enamored by those, bloody, gory
Big
cases,
surgeries.
big surgeries. And I used to do those big ophthalmic surgeries before,
Yeah.
and I don't do them anymore.
Yeah.
I used to be the one person who would do the keratoplasty and would do the complex, ocular reconstructions. And I wish I had those cases again so I could show off to my daughter a little bit, but also to be unique. I felt at the time, I felt like I'm really have a role in my field, and I'm making a difference where maybe I'm kind of the end of the road, like for some patients who no one
Right.
else would take care of, I could take care of them.
Yeah.
So I miss those. But in private practice, it's hard to have a balance if you're doing
Yeah.
those very complicated cases.
Yeah.
It's not, they don't come to you, and then it's also hard to manage them.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into our theme, which is horror stories. So, Neda, you have had an illustrious career. You have taken care of a lot of complex patients over the years. I'm sure things have not always gone smoothly, even for you, even as someone as talented as you are. I'm sure you've still had challenges. And I think one of the joys of this podcast is everyone I talk to makes me feel a little bit better. Like I'm not the only one who has challenging patients or cases, or has a day that didn't go quite as I had planned. So as you look back, either recently or in the distant past, any patients stick out in your mind of something that was a challenge that was a little bit difficult, either in the moment or an ongoing issue that you had to deal with?
How many hours do we have for this podcast?
As many, and for you, Neda, as many as we need. We will be here all night.
But when you put that question to me, there's definitely about a handful of cases that come to mind, and all of these cases are those that when I come across a situation that reminds me of it, I remember the moment. It's almost like I relive
Like
that moment.
PTSD. It's like a flashback.
PTSD a little bit, yes. One of the first really bad complications I had was actually the first year I was in practice in Portland, Oregon, in a cornea department. And I had a penetrating keratoplasty, actually, of a retired head of the hospital. This person was a very important person, and I'm actually shocked that I was given the opportunity to do his penetrating keratoplasty, but I was kind of known to do very nice corneal transplants, open sky. He was very ill. He was in his 90s. He was very old. And he had been hospitalized, and he had actually was monocular. This was his only eye. And he had lost his other eye to glaucoma. So I went in and I thought I had taken all the precautions you can imagine, but as soon as I opened the eye, the open sky, he had an expulsive hemorrhage.
Wow.
Where everything came forward. I mean, literally within, I can't even tell you, it feels, I'm getting goosebumps right now just talking about it. And this is 20 years ago, okay, mind you.
This is within a half second of opening.
Within half a second of me opening the cornea, the button is off, and I'm ready to sew the new cornea on, and I look down and the retina is looking at me. Complete expulsive hemorrhage. There's blood like gushing out. His blood pressure was under control. There was really nothing that we could do. I mean, I tried to put the cornea on, but it wouldn't fit because the iris, the lens, the retina, the optic nerve was like everything was forward. Everything was forward. And all I remember is having my thumb. I put my thumb on the opening, waiting for, kind of for the blood to stop flowing. And then I just took the cornea and I asked for, I don't think 10-0 would not hold. 10-0 would just cut right through. So I asked for like a 8O silk, and I just started trying to sew the cornea on.
Can I ask
Make
you
a
a
long story
question real
short,
quick? How old, like what part of your training is this? You said
it was my first year in practice.
so you
First year in
were a
practice.
fellow, a first
I
year
was in my 30s. I mean, it was my first year in practice. I had done a cornea fellowship. I had stayed home for a year with my daughter. So it was and this was my first year in real practice. I was like 30.
One of your first cases?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. It was one of my first cases in my new practice. Retired head of the hospital.
Monocular.
Monocular, ill elderly gentleman who had been in and out of the hospital for multiple medical problems and then needed a corneal transplant because his one good eye couldn't see, and they felt that he needs the transplant to be able to function. But the end of the story is that I couldn't close the eye. So Mark came, supported me, was very, very supportive. And we went to tell the family. We told the family that I wasn't, that he had a hemorrhage and that we couldn't save the eye, that he's going to be bilaterally blind now. He unfortunately passed actually 2 days later. So this was not because of the corneal transplant. He went into DIC. I mean, this was probably a reflection of his general
Medical health.
medical health. And I hate to admit this, but I hate to admit this, but
I know what you're gonna say. I know what you're gonna say.
I was, yeah,
I
I
know
was,
what you're gonna say.
yeah.
I would
It was
understand.
like, I was happy that it wasn't my doing, that
Right.
it was an underlying medical problem.
Right.
And I felt guilty for the longest time because there was a sense of relief that he passed. And I can't tell you how long it took for me to get over the sense of guilt that I felt relief that he had passed. And that to me was harder than him losing his eye. Like for me to say, how could I, as a physician, be okay that a patient of mine passed? And this is the first time I'm admitting to this.
Yeah.
I can't believe I just did that.
No, I don't think
this is what happens when I'm here with you, Gary. You make me vulnerable.
we're gonna both start crying at some point, Neda. So
Yeah.
let me give you my take on this as I'm hearing this and processing this in real time. As an ophthalmologist, what are we trying to do? We are trying to improve the quality of life of our patients. We save some lives. There's some ocular oncologists and folks who are heroically saving lives. I don't mean to discount that. And pediatric ophthalmologists who are diagnosing retinoblastoma and others. So, but for the most part, we are trying to improve the quality of our patients' lives for the amount of days that they have. And so when you do that and you're looking at a patient who is going to be bilaterally blind for the rest of his days, you are thinking that this patient is not going to have much quality of life and that the patient will be suffering.
Exactly. And I finally came to terms with that, and that it was a relief on his behalf, that I felt so horribly for the fact that he would have to live the rest of his life. He was in his late 90s and without vision. And it was hard for me to imagine how that would be. And when he passed because of other medical problems, and yes, there was this kind of relief that he wouldn't have to live that way. But for a while, I thought, gosh, is this kind of was the sense of relief self-serving? But I realized that was not the case. And especially as I've grown to know myself as a physician, I can tell you that I'm one of the most, probably not as much as you are, but compassionate doctors you can find. And so, but I didn't know that of myself at the time. I didn't know that really firmly. And we get to learn that about ourselves as time goes by. Like you get to learn the type of doctor you are. Are you the type of doctor who really cares about your patients and really puts everything on the line for your patients? And I have learned through the years that I'm absolutely that type of doctor. But at the time, I didn't really quite have an identity as a doctor, doctor who stood on my own feet. And so I was kind of shocked by my internal reaction to him passing, rather than be devastated by him passing. I was relieved. But you're right. I think my relief came not because of selfish reasons. It came because I was devastated inside for him living that loss of
Yeah.
bilateral vision, but I was relieved to know that he didn't have to live that way. So I appreciate you seeing it that way.
Yeah, I absolutely see it that way because I know you and I
Yeah.
know that that's how, I mean, I know that's how you would process it. I think there are certain times in life when things happen to us and we almost see ourselves from the outside in a weird way. Like we get a weird, like we step outside of our bodies and we are analyzing ourselves as if we're somebody else. And,
Yeah.
sometimes the analysis is good and sometimes it's not good. But whatever it is, I think it's important to realize that that is, whether it's really hard or it's enlightening or whatever it is, it's a little bit of an insight that you can work from,
Yeah.
and not to ignore that, and also, it's okay that sometimes things aren't all good or all bad. We are all full of contradictions, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
We're full of complex emotions that aren't just one thing or another.
And
And
I
I
think
find myself,
yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's that kind of looking in the mirror. And if you hopefully most of the time when you're looking at yourself from the outside, you like what you see.
yeah,
But there will be times when you don't. And instead of being critical of that, be curious as to why you
right,
behaved a certain way or why you reacted a certain way, so that the next time your behavior will be such that you will be proud of your
yeah,
actions rather than not. Um,
yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
that was definitely kind of a pivotal moment. I have to say, every time I do a open sky penetrating keratoplasty, thankfully I don't do as many anymore because I do so much more lamellar surgeries. But
right,
gosh, every time I pause right before I open the cap, and I get flashbacks of that moment. And one tiny plug for Mark Terry, who at that time could have been angry at me. I had just joined him. He could have been, you know, I don't know. He could have broken me,
right,
by
right,
by his maybe by
reaction,
a or aggressive reaction. He was incredibly supportive, incredibly empathetic, um, was such, but then also, had me come with him to go talk to the family. Like, he didn't say, I'm going to go talk to the family. He didn't belittle me at all. He really
right.
elevated me in that experience. And I really am grateful to him. And I think that so much of who I am as a mentor, I've learned from Mark Terry
Yeah.
through the years. I find myself sometimes mimicking him in the way he was as a mentor to me.
Isn't that the ultimate compliment is when
Yeah, no,
someone,
absolutely.
if at some point someone in their future says, I treated someone with compassion because Neda Shamie treated me with compassion and I learned how to be a good doctor by watching her, wouldn't that just be the best compliment,
Yeah,
And I will say,
absolutely.
I'm sure there are many people out there who could say that and would say that. I would say that actually. And that is the joy and responsibility of mentorship, and is to step into a situation where someone is vulnerable and helping them to a point where they can move past and move on. And what a loss it would have been if that case took something out of the world that was desperately needed. If you became, so nervous or broken about, the complication that it prevented you from helping other people. I'm sure Mark saw that in the moment. He's like, this is a talented person the world needs. And I don't know Mark personally, but just from your stories, it sounds like he's wise beyond his years and he's someone who is incredibly compassionate himself.
Yeah, he really is. He's very
So
special.
shout out to Mark
Um,
Terry. If you're listening to this, great
Yeah,
job, Dr. Terry.
exactly. I'm gonna have to send him a copy of this. So that's one of many, many stories, but
Yeah. I actually had
you
it.
know,
I actually had my first choroidal hemorrhage, suprachoroidal hemorrhage about 2.5 months ago,
oh
on
my
a
God.
monocular patient, and in his 90s. Thankfully, it was not expulsive, but I couldn't get a lens in and had to suture the eye and just, he had to be aphakic for like 3 months and
Yeah.
needed round the clock care. And I just was broken about this. You know, just calling my retina colleagues, and thankfully, happy ending to the story. He had his choroidals drained. He's got a lens in the eye, and he's doing great. But that weight of it all is really, really tough to deal with, especially because, as Blake and I have said this many times on this podcast, talking to others, is when something happens, it's not like you have bereavement time to handle your feelings, process your emotions, and then move through to the next case. You have to literally dust yourself off, gather yourself, be a robot, and move into the next case and give that patient your very best. And that, if there is, I don't know what the most challenging thing about being an ophthalmologist is. There are a lot of challenging things, many of which are just dealing with patients who are unsatisfied with outcomes that on paper seem very perfect. That probably is something that will drive me to an early grave. But beyond that, it's the challenge of the volume of patients that are necessary to serve, the numbers of patients that just by the sheer math will have a complication, and the days that you have to move through a complication into the next surgery or a series of surgeries and still give every patient your best while putting your emotions and your grief and your feelings to the side, because you don't want that to impact the care of the next patient. How do you deal with that?
It's, again, you just have to refocus. You have to compartmentalize. And the responsibility we have is to that patient who's in your seat at that moment. And so and I agree with you. I think it's challenging to obviously do that, because it's hard not to let it affect your sense of self and confidence. I mean, after that experience, you would imagine I would just never do another penetrating keratoplasty, but I went on to do thousands of them after, and I'm really good at doing them. And I think because of that experience, I really committed myself to making sure that I do the surgery as best as I can, and maybe to cancel out the feeling of defeat in that one case.
Right.
And I think that's what happens is sometimes when when we have a result that's suboptimal, especially if we feel responsible for that result, for the next 20 cases, I put in 150% into it.
Yes.
To really prove to myself that I can do it, and I do it right, and I really am committed to the best outcome ever. So if anything, not that I wish complications for myself or anyone, but when I do have an unexpected complication, I'm actually the best version of myself for the next many, many cases, because I want to redeem myself in a sense.
Yeah. I understand
But it's the little complications that it's like you said, the unhappy patients where you didn't maybe communicate the right way to, and those are the ones that really kill us, because they happen, a little more often, and sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around, and then no matter how much you put into making sure that the patient has the right outcome, if the outcome doesn't match what your efforts were, that's when it's challenging to really, to me, that is, like you said, a slow death of our self-esteem.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. I will say one thing, and this is just something I have promised myself going forward that I will do, is if I have a complication, my tendency is to literally just walk into the next room proud and confident and ready to redeem myself, et cetera. But, if you've been working on a case for, let's say there's a vitrectomy, or you've got to do a Yamani on the fly or something crazy that you're not really, expecting, I would challenge everyone to go, if you have an office or a little place in your surgery center where you operate, and just gather yourself, give yourself a minute or two, take a drink of water, eat something. You've burned up a lot of catecholamines during that hour. Your blood sugar is probably a little bit low. You're probably a little bit dehydrated. You probably just need to breathe for a few seconds and just focus yourself. And so I think if you can do that, you will have a better chance of not stacking complications, because that can happen as well. And I've had that happen as well. And it's not too fun to have to deal with multiple complications.
And it's also okay to if you really can't pull yourself together, it's okay to cancel the next series of cases.
Yeah.
Or push them back, or get help.
Exactly.
I find, I'm really lucky that I work in a surgery center where there's a lot of colleagues that I have huge respect for, and Actually, on my days, Nicole Fram is there, and Nicole, as you know, does a lot of complicated cases. So when I have had complications, I go across the hall and I say, "Hey, Nicole, help me out here," or
Yeah.
I go over something that went wrong, and I love that we do this for each other, is that we pat each other on the back and we say, "That's okay, you'll
Yeah.
fix it," or "Okay."
Exactly. Exactly.
Thankfully, those complications don't happen often, but when they do, it's okay to talk to friends, review that video, put an effort into discovering why it happens so that you feel empowered by it rather than really broken by it. And the worst thing
Absolutely.
you can do is blame it on everyone else. Like
Yep.
that never feels good. I don't ever do that, but I've seen people do that. Like the shooter was wrong, whatever, the injector
Right.
was wrong, technician did this, this and that. And that to me is a learning opportunity lost.
Yeah.
And it's really important that if you feel that there was a mistake happen, then we can all learn from it. Actually, this
Yes.
reminds me of another quick disaster case, not a total disaster, but a really shocking case that I swear every time now at that step of the surgery, I remember it, literally a vivid flashback. And it's right at the end, when you're hydrating the wound
Yep.
with the cannula. There's this one case, I was at USC, so this is more than about 14 years ago. And I came to hydrate and the plunger just wouldn't move. It felt like it was under pressure, right? But I'm like, okay, it's probably because I'm really pressing against the corneal wound to do it. So I was pressing really hard to hydrate and I wasn't seeing the cornea hydrating. All of a sudden, the cannula
Okay.
shot off of the syringe and went across the eye and landed on the peripheral retina, like literally through the lens. Imagine this is the end of the case. The lens is in the capsule. Everything was perfect. It was like perfect, pristine cataract.
And then a
And
missile.
it was like a missile that went uh, through the peripheral capsule, tore the capsule, and landed like, I think, pars plana, like an intravitreal injection, but from the inside out. And it
What did
was
you do?
shocking. It was shocking. I remember just everyone just
Gasping.
shocked. Yeah, everyone was in shock. And I looked down and there's obviously vitreous. The lens now is tilted. So on the spot, I had to do vitrectomy, and the patient did fine. The patient did fine, was 2020. Didn't, I explained that there was a complication, but patient would have never known any other way because the outcome was perfect. But every time, how many thousands of cases have I done? Every time I'm hydrating the corneal wound, I first test the plunger outside the eye and then I hydrate the wound
Yep.
because it's just stuck in my head and I can't unsee it,
You're the second person this week who has told me almost that exact same story. I won't tell you who the other person is, but someone we both
We
know.
may have to have a support group there.
Yes. Yes. I think we need to have a support group for cannula ejection complications. But yeah, I actually have had some weird complications from hydration, mostly involving Decimate detachments. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that like Decimates completely detach. But
I
I've had
haven't
that
seen it,
happen.
but I've heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that. And also I had a patient who I kind of do a Wong way incision, but I do it from the inside up instead of the outside down. So I make a little pocket in the stroma and in the roof of my incision, and I hydrate into that. But I didn't realize that this particular patient had LASIK. And so when I went to hydrate that little tunnel, that little pocket that I create, I saw a fluid wave go across the cornea, and I thought I had detached Decimates. So I put an air bubble in, went to do another case. I usually try and leave an air bubble in for like 15 or 20 minutes to get Decimates to reattach. I've had this happen like 2 times, Decimates detached. So that's what it looked like to me. I came back and I was like, okay, everything looks good. I'm like massaging, I'm massaging the cornea, trying to get everything, pristine. I go to hydrate and it detaches again. And I'm
Oh,
like, what is going on? And that's when it
I'm
dawned on
guessing.
me that I had actually intersected the LASIK flap.
Gosh,
And I
yeah.
had actually injected fluid into the interface of the LASIK flap by making that little pocket. And so, it's funny. maybe someone else has had that happen, but I feel like, it's like there's a million ways to screw up things. And I guess I'm
Here's
inventing new ways.
the great thing about ophthalmology is that thankfully there are also a million ways to fix.
Yeah.
And that's the key. And this is what I teach the younger generation is don't, cataract surgery or kind of our surgeries have become so simplified with the advanced technology, with laser and with all the things that we do
Exactly.
that they're not learning extra cap. Like we had to in our residency, and I'm dating myself, we had to do 50 extra caps before we could move on to phaco. 50, that's a lot.
Wow,
You're right.
That's a lot.
But this is 20 some years ago. Now residents are graduating without having ever done an extra cap.
Yep.
And
it's a critical skill.
It's a critical skill. So what I tell the younger generation is don't avoid learning to manage complicated cases, whether it's, extra cap may be, a rare thing that you need to do, but definitely suturing cases, suturing lenses. Yamani is a really important skill to know.
Absolutely.
Ahmed segments, really important skill to know. How to manage floppy iris, how to do Malyugin rings. I mean, those are now basics.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important to learn those skills early because, what I hear sometimes they say, well, I don't want to do those cases. It's not that you don't want to.
They're going to find you. Those cases are going to find you.
Exactly. And that patient is relying on you to take that patient from their cataract to an endpoint that's going to be positive. And if you don't have those skills, you're not going to be able to do that for that patient. And
well, you saw my case this weekend. We were at Summer ACOS Deer Valley. Shout out if anyone is looking for a great summer meeting. ACOS Deer Valley is fantastic. But Neda, you were on my panel and you saw my IOL exchange nightmare where had almost total loss of the bag and on the fly had to, figure out how to get an Ahmed segment in and do a flange technique with the Ahmed segment and, able to save that case. But you need to have a few extra tools in your toolbox when things inevitably go wrong, because it's great when you can not have a complication, but, if you can make par out of the sand trap, it feels pretty good, to still deliver a good outcome despite suboptimal things happening in the OR.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, Neda, it's always a joy to talk to you. You're one of the most special people in ophthalmology, and I count you as a dear friend, both as a colleague and as a personal friend. And so thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And the feeling is mutual. I think you are amazing, Gary. And it's been such a joy getting to know you. And I love calling you my friend. And also there's quite a number of people at the ACOS meeting who are wanting you to run for presidency of the United States. So I'd like this to be the first announcement.
Okay, there we go. You heard it here first, folks. I'll be on the ticket.
Exactly. We love you a lot. I think, Gary, you're really special. You're incredibly generous with your knowledge, with your friendship, with your kindness, and I am forever grateful for that. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast and for having me among your friends.
Absolutely. Neda, you're so sweet. Well, with that, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for everyone for tuning in and joining this very special podcast with Dr. Neda Shamie. Until next time, this has been Ophthalmology Off the Grid. I'm Dr. Gary Wörtz.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid, and thank you to our guest, Dr. Neda Shamie. Tune in to future episodes to hear more horror stories from top ophthalmic surgeons.